You don't want to come out of your sessions of like, oh, like I'm S+3 now, or oh, I ranked up or I didn't rank up. Like you want to focus on the exact things that you're asking, and how do you actually work on them and how do you get your answers is by testing, the experimentation. Find what's comfortable for you, find what is successful for you and kind of use that. But also understand when you're trying new things, when you're pushing your limits like this, it's going to be worse before it gets better. And that doesn't mean like if it's worse initially, because if you go into your games thinking about being more like positioning more offensive and taking more space, you're going to feed way more than you normally do. And when you start feeding, that's a natural part of the process of you getting better and you understanding where it's safe to be and where it's not safe to be. So when we come out of this review, I don't want you to say, oh, I tried to, move forward and I died and I went 2-7 in this game, so I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm going to, I want to rank up, so I'm going to sit on tent for 90% of the game. And because I was, on average, I was winning more, so I can climb better that way. That is not what I want you to do. You're going to feed, you're going to have bad games. That's okay. As long as you're learning from that feeding, that's how everyone learns. So just to give us a little bit of a backstory, Keki, is this solo queue, scrim, private battle? What's the context of this? What rank are you at now? S+2? Okay. Anyways, looking at comps, we got ourselves, we're playing with a kind of, this is interesting. So we're playing like basically triple backline. Because we have 3 backline, your positioning is going to be, you're probably going to have to be a little bit more flexible. In terms of positioning, charger on tent. You're going to have Splatling sitting here. Splash will be hovering around mid as well. And I would probably imagine you're probably going to be, like you 3 are kind of going to be stacked over here. You can get a lot of value out of just constantly shooting shots in these areas. Just dislodge them as best you can. When you're like poking around and stuff and you're having control, like people like to shark, along this ledge, people like to sit behind here. And especially once you start retaking, you'll want to hit people around this like tent area. I guess just this whole tent area. So understanding like what shots, you can get value even if you don't directly hit them, and knowing where you can actually, kind of make people uncomfortable, make the enemy team uncomfortable. You do have to be careful about the ball point, but everyone else on their team is not as much, they're going to probably be sitting and sharking in a lot of these common spots that I've kind of pointed out in these areas. So if you don't know where to shoot, like if you're not aiming at someone directly, those are probably pretty good. Because like this paint that you're getting over here is what you should have been doing before everyone's set up, basically. These shots are fine, but like you should have already had special by now. You can definitely have it. This is why getting those early specials is really important, so that there's not this desync of, oh, they don't know that you're trying to paint while, they're trying to push forward or like look for plays and you're still getting your specials up. But at least you're focusing your pressure over here on the right side, which is, like if you're going to sit 10, at least keep this under control, which is good. But at a certain point, I would look to try to be a little bit more, provide a little bit more presence for your team. Yeah, and you can see the enemy team is like playing around left more. This also goes back to the adaptation, because like early on in the game, you did a good job of like deterring them from wanting to use this right side, which is good, like because that's a scary flank. But you can see the enemy team's kind of adapting, and they're like after the first minute, they've been targeting this left side a little bit more because they're, not wanting to have to deal with the pressure you're putting. So now your value on here gets less and less. I like that you're off the canopy now, so let's see if you can. Yeah, it feels like you're just playing a little bit too scared. Like the pressure of that inkjet over top, the enemy team is not looking for a shot on you. They're trying to stay alive and they're like swimming around and they're very nervous because this inkjet is like over top these pillars are very, very strong. Going into this, my entire mindset was guarding flanks. Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's one, like that's too one dimensional for you to be able to like successfully do. Like that is part of the picture, but I don't think you can go into it and say this is my one objective and this is my one role, because I don't think it's enough on average. Depending on your team comps, but it's definitely something you want to keep in mind. But you can also guard those flanks by constantly hitting, these behind these pillars, because if they end up dropping, you'll see that kind of thing. I think you can play a little bit more aggressive and still accomplish that same role. Because the reason why you have to worry about these flanks as much is because your team doesn't have as much of a presence. And so the enemy team can like take these sides like for free basically. So I play on the cubes right. It's gonna depend, because like if your ballpoint is sitting like right here, you don't want to step on their toes. But and this is a thing as you get better, is like you want to constantly be moving. You don't want to sit in the same position for too long, because you become predictable and the enemy team can like play around the way that you're playing. So you may move up. There may be opportunities for you to move up, and then you can move up to these little areas and you can shoot over them. This positioning's fine, but there's going to be certain opportunities where you'll be able to be more aggressive and you can push even into the zone and potentially past it. That question, where's the limit, is how far you can go forward. That is like that is the question that you should be asking after this review. And the way that you test that is by pushing that limit. You want to, what I consider like limit test, and just kind of push what that is. Maybe be a little bit more aggressive. Try to time it when it makes sense. So like time it when your team either has numbers or when you have, a special out that is pressuring the enemy team. Try to put some logic as to when it would make sense to be forward and when it would make sense to be a little bit more back. But when you see your team with a clear advantage and y'all have the ability to have some momentum forward, like when y'all have a pick on this person, there's probably a good chance, now that y'all have numbers, that you all can be moving forward. Another thing causing you to play a very passive playstyle, watching tip videos not to die. I mean, not dying is really good. It's an important tip, but you need to contextualize it. And the context for this is the better way to phrase that is that you want to play as far forward as you can without dying, basically. So that's like the other part of it, which makes it this really gray zone, because where it's safe to be is constantly changing throughout the match. But you will stagnate as a player if you're too scared to move forward. At some point, you have to understand. And, again, try to have reason. It's a 4v3. Okay, it's probably safe for me to move forward. It's important to stay alive, but it's also important to provide value. When you're asking, like, when do you use Toxic Mist? Like, this could be a good example of when you would want to mist. This choke point, a lot of times people will want to navigate through and like go back to mid this way. So like when there's 3 of them stuck here, it's very slow for them and it's congested for all 3 of them to move back here. So getting pressure here, and you could just use your main weapon in this spot. But if, this is a nice spot potentially for your mist, so that you're preventing them from being able to just kind of run through, and you're limiting their options. Either they have to take a fight here, which they don't want to do in a pit and on low ground, or you're forcing them back here, which gives your team time to start moving forward. Forcing these people either getting the picks, which you end up getting, or forcing them to go back this way is a way that they're wasting time, and that gives your team time to start moving forward and painting forward. But anyways, y'all are getting some momentum. You can hear the last one underneath you. Nice. So yeah, this is a spot, their team is all coming out of respawn, and like we showed before, most of the map is yellow, the enemy color. So if I'm you, I'm definitely getting off tent. I'm looking to move forward and like, paint these flanks is always a good habit to do. Just as a team, there's not really any one person's role, but like getting those flanks covered is good. And again, pressuring them out of these spots is good as well. because your teammates are going to start getting specials, which you already have 2 now, but you know, kind of the flow of the match. You all retook without specials, which means you're going to have specials when you're holding the zone. You score points in zones by not allowing the enemy to interact with the zone, which basically means as a team, you want to be in front of the zone and position in front of the zone, which it's hard to do, you know? Like when you wipe the enemy team, that's an opportunity because you have a ton of space to work with, and that's what you'll want to do. You don't want to set up here when you have the opportunity to take space forward. You want to get into a situation where like your charger's sitting here, Splatling, I don't really know exactly where they'd want to sit, probably somewhere in this area, and then your splash can help in this area as well. And so like you'll have like 3 people in this area, you have your charger watching these areas, and you've pinned the team back. Obviously that requires you to win mid first, but you know, like as you have the ability to take space forward, you want to make sure you're taking it. Yeah. And like when these specials are coming out, like the Inkjet and the Trizuka, this goes back to like my philosophy of like trying to play near the ledges when these specials are active, because it allows you to easily drop and like move out of the way or sit back here and like drop out. But you stayed alive, which is good. I should be able to win this at this point. One thing that's really tough, like if you're trying to learn the game and you're trying to improve, on average, you're gonna like improve faster if you push yourself to be more aggressive on average than being more defensive. Because you put yourself into more learning situations when you're aggressive. And there's very like overall, there's a lot we can take from with this game. But when it comes to like your usage of, you know, the stringer, when it comes to your usage of toxic mist, usage of whale, you know, how to get value, what types of situations you want to use it in, we can't really extract a lot of that because of the way that we're playing. We're playing too passive, so it's hard to really pinpoint much from that. We went through it, but you know, find spots to take space when there's an opportunity. Take space when you have an advantage. EDV, advantage. So anytime your team has an advantage, and that can be number advantage, that can be a special advantage, that can be when a special is being used, like the Inkjet provides a lot of space for your team to move. These are all spots where that should be a cue to you that you want to start moving forward. In order to learn and improve, usually it requires you to unlearn a lot of habits that you've developed that's found you success in previous games. But that success is only happening because you're playing against teams that aren't punishing you for it. Focus like one thing at a time, basically. So like when we were talking about it, like you ask yourself a lot of really good questions. And I think you're asking the right questions when it comes to mist, when it comes to where do I position when, you know, so you're asking when I push up past the tent, do I position myself on one of the flanks or right behind zone? You're going to do both in a lot of situations. So that's like, again, like all the questions that you're asking, try to focus on one of them. All of the questions that you're asking right now is like perfect. These are all the things that you need to be thinking about when you're playing the game. But in order to learn is that you have to push yourself. Yourself. Which that means like the whole idea of like limit testing. You have to push your limits so that you can start answering these questions while you play. These aren't the questions that you're asking, as we've mentioned, they're like very much it depends. So it's not You're not going to get your answer through theory alone. You don't want to come out of your sessions of like, oh, like I'm S+3 now, or oh, I ranked up or I didn't rank up. Like you want to focus on the exact things that you're asking, and how do you actually work on them and how do you get your answers is by testing, the experimentation. Find what's comfortable for you, find what is successful for you and kind of use that, but also understand when you're trying new things, when you're pushing your limits like this, it's going to be worse before it gets better. And that doesn't mean like if it's worse initially, because if you go into your games thinking about being more like positioning more offensive and taking more space, you're going to feed way more than you normally do. And when you start feeding, that's a natural part of the process of you getting better and you understanding where it's safe to be and where it's not safe to be. So when we come out of this review, I don't want you to say, oh, I tried to, move forward and I died and I went 2-7 in this game, so I'm not doing that anymore. And I'm going to, I want to rank up, so I'm going to sit on tent for 90% of the game. And because I was, on average, I was winning more, so I can climb better that way. That is not what I want you to do. You're going to feed, you're going to have bad games. That's okay. As long as you're learning from that feeding, that's how everyone learns. I think your mechanics are like fine enough, and like your aim, like you have a lot of really nice shots with your tri-stringer. So I think you're not going to have as hard of a time as you may expect, but you have to be willing to sacrifice some ranked points now for the betterment of your improvement. Because once you learn the questions that you're asking, once you can better assess them in the moment, you're going to rank up super, super, super quick. Failure is improvement. And I think there's a mentality there of you being too risk adverse and you want to be more aggressive. So once you're more comfortable being able to take risk and take, to fail, you're going to push up on this map and you're going to get flanked by this solution, you're going to die, and that's okay. Instead of saying, oh, I shouldn't have been, trying to poke at these things. Instead, I need to poke at these things, but I also need to manage these side flanks. And, maybe there's something that clues you in on it. Maybe you throw a bunch of shots over here and someone ends up dropping. And when they drop, the logical thing for them to do next, if it's like a short range weapon, is to go for this type of flank. So if you dislodge someone and you don't see them move back, if they drop off the side instead of moving back, now it's like, oh, I know there's someone in this area. So either they're going to go back up, or if they, if it's a short range weapon that can get value from flanking, then, maybe there's a flank opportunity there. There's other things that you can do where like you map check to like keep an eye on paint and keep an eye on, those potential flank areas, but I don't want to overload you right now. The biggest thing is all the questions you're asking are perfect. Focus on getting your answers. It's not something like you can ask and get some guidance from people, but you're only really going to like learn it by doing it yourself, experiencing the failure, experiencing the success. We're too early in the learning process to be able to provide you useful ways to do it. You first have to just get the exposure. Keki played very passive, and that's the problem. But this stat line, shows why stats are generally meaningless. But if someone comes out of this game, and Keki was very like, they took my advice, they asked a bunch of questions, their mentality is awesome. So I'm not saying them specifically, but there's a lot of people, because they probably should have lost this game, if I'm going to be honest. And they probably should have lost because of the way Keki was positioning. But there could be people that could lose the game with this kind of stat line and then like blame their teammates. But again, Keki didn't do this. Keki's awesome. But it's just, it's interesting how stats can be deceptive. Because if I saw the stat line going into the game, like the game is just a completely different story. And this is why you need to be analytical. And looking at stats, like when people focus on stats outside of it being a resource tool, this is like, it's you can cope with your stats super hard and feel like you're not the problem because your stats look super, super, super nice.